Just that one, please." Those words tasted like ash in Clara's mouth. She stood at the bakery counter, her hands red from the cold, pushing a small pile of dirty coins forward, 3 quarters, 2 dimes, and a handful of pennies. The woman behind the counter didn't smile. She just stared at Clara's wet hair and cheap coat, her eyes saying what everyone in the city seemed to think. "You don't belong here." It was her son Leo's 5th birthday, and this $3 cupcake was the only party she could afford. She was about to walk out into the rain, feeling invisible and broken, when she arrived home to find a black box worth $5,000 sitting on her doorstep. And when she tried to return it to her cold, distant billionaire boss, he didn't fire her. He locked the office door and whispered 5 words that would rewrite their entire past. But what happened next? No one saw it coming. Not even her. Before I reveal those 5 words, hit that like if you've ever sacrificed your own happiness for your child. This story is for you. Now, let's go back to the coins, the rain, and the moment Clara's life changed forever. Clara walked out of that bakery shielding the small white box under her coat, her face burning with shame. The walk back to their apartment was long. They lived on the edge of the city, in a neighborhood where the streetlights flickered and the buildings leaned together like tired old men. Her apartment complex was a towering block of brick that smelled of damp carpet and other people's dinners. It wasn't much, but it was theirs. It was the fortress where she kept Leo safe. As she climbed the 3 flights of stairs, the elevator had been broken since January. Clara rehearsed the smile she would wear when she opened the door. She would sing, "Happy Birthday," loud and off-key. They would split the cupcake. She would tell him a story about a brave knight, and he would fall asleep feeling like a prince. That was the plan. It was a simple, quiet plan for a simple, quiet life. But when Clara reached the landing of the 3rd floor, her breath hitched. The hallway was usually empty, save for a few discarded flyers, but tonight something was sitting in front of her door. It was a box, and not just any box. It was sleek, matte black, and large, about the size of a microwave. It sat on the dirty welcome mat like an alien artifact, completely out of place against the peeling paint of her front door. There was no shipping label, no stamps, and no scuff marks from a delivery truck. It looked pristine. A thick, silken ribbon the color of midnight was wrapped around it. Clara froze, her heart hammering against her ribs. Packages didn't just appear here. If you ordered something, it usually got stolen before you got home. But this looked like it commanded too much respect to be stolen. She approached it slowly, checking the hallway. Empty. Silence. She unlocked her door, ushered herself inside, and then, driven by a bizarre mix of curiosity and dread, she reached out and dragged the heavy box into her small, drafty living room. The contrast was blinding. The box looked like it belonged in a museum or a penthouse, not on her scratched laminate floor next to a pile of unpaid utility bills. With trembling fingers, Clara pulled the ribbon. It came undone with a smooth, expensive whisper. She lifted the lid. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Nestled in custom-cut foam was a robot. It wasn't a cheap plastic toy from a department store. It was made of white, glossy metal and carbon fiber, with articulated joints that looked terrifyingly realistic. It was a prototype model, something she had seen only in tech magazines. A limited edition, Vanspot companion. These things cost thousands of dollars. They were programmed to learn, to teach languages, and to play chess. It cost more than her rent for the entire year. "No," she whispered, panic rising in her throat. "This is a mistake." She scrambled to find a receipt, a note, anything. Her fingers brushed against the inside of the lid and found a small, embossed card. There was no name, no happy birthday. Just a logo stamped in silver foil. It was a sharp, angular V. Vance Enterprises. The blood drained from Clara's face. Vance Enterprises was her workplace. She was just a lowly administrative assistant, an invisible cog in the machine. She had never spoken to anyone important. She had never told a soul at work about Leo's birthday. She made a point of being a ghost, coming in early and leaving late, keeping her personal life completely sealed off to avoid judgment. Why was there a $5,000 robot from her boss's company sitting in her living room? This wasn't a gift. Gifts were warm. Gifts were personal. This felt cold. It felt like she was being watched. Had she stolen it? No, that was impossible. Has someone sent it to frame her? Was this a test? Clara looked at the expensive machine, then at the small, crushed box containing the $3 cupcake. The gap between the two terrified her. She wasn't looking at a present, she was looking at a trap. And as the rain hammered against the window, Clara realized with a sinking dread that her invisibility, the one thing that kept her safe, had just been shattered. But Clara had no idea that this box wasn't just a gift, it was a ticking time bomb. And bringing it into the office the next morning wouldn't just risk her job, it would bring her face to face with a secret she had buried for 5 years. Vance Enterprises was not just a building, it was a cathedral of capitalism, a needle of steel and glass that pierced the gray skyline of the city, daring the clouds to touch it. To Clara, standing at the base of the tower with her frayed tote bag and her sensible, worn-down heels, it felt less like a workplace and more like a fortress she had to breach every single morning. The automatic doors hissed open, releasing a blast of climate-controlled air that smelled of ozone and expensive floor polish. It was a scent that instantly made Clara feel inadequate. She hadn't slept. The black box was currently shoved into the back of her small closet, hidden under a pile of winter blankets. She had spent the entire night staring at the ceiling, wondering if she was going to be arrested the moment she swiped her badge. Had she inadvertently embezzled funds? Was it a test of her honesty? The robot toy burned in her mind like a stolen diamond. She had to return it. That was the only solution. She would find the HR department, or perhaps a logistics manager, and explain that there had been a mix-up. She would be honest, humble, and invisible, just as she always was. But the universe had a way of laughing at plans. Just as Clara merged into the stream of employees heading toward the elevators, a hush fell over the lobby. It was sudden and absolute, like a heavy blanket dropped over a cage of birds. The chatter of morning coffees died. The clicking of heels on marble stopped. Even the security guards straightened their spines, looking forward with rigid discipline. Julian Vance had entered the building. He moved through space not like a man, but like a weather system. He was flanked by 2 assistants who were practically jogging to keep up with his long, predatory strides, but Julian himself seemed to glide. He was tall, with broad shoulders encased in a suit that cost more than Clara's entire education. His face was a mask of cold, sculpted perfection, sharp cheekbones, a jawline that could cut glass, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, dark and impenetrable. He didn't look left or right. He didn't acknowledge the "Good morning, Mr. Vance," murmured by a brave VP near the reception desk. He simply existed in a higher stratum of reality, one where other people were merely obstacles to be navigated around. Clara clutched her bag to her chest, trying to shrink into the marble pillar behind her. She wanted to disappear. If he saw her, surely he would see the guilt written on her face. He would know about the box. Julian swept past the reception, his path taking him dangerously close to where Clara was standing. She held her breath, her heart hammering a frantic rhythm against her ribs. He was passing her. He was ignoring her, just as he ignored everyone else. She was safe. And then, he stopped. It was a pause so subtle that if you blinked, you would have missed it. Julian Vance, the man who never wasted a second, broke his stride. He came to a halt just 2 feet from Clara. The air around him seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't turn his whole body. He just turned his head, slowly, deliberately. His eyes locked onto hers. For a terrifying, suspended second, Clara felt stripped bare. His gaze wasn't angry, nor was it kind. It was intense, searching, and unnervingly familiar, though she knew she had never met him face to face. It felt as if he was looking for something specific, scanning her soul for a crack, a flaw, or perhaps a secret. The noise of the lobby seemed to fade into a dull roar, leaving only the sound of her own blood rushing in her ears. He looked at her wet hair, her cheap coat, and then his eyes drifted lower, lingering for a fraction of a second on her hands, which were white-knuckled around her bag. Clara trembled. He knows, she thought. He knows about the robot. But before she could stammer out a confession or an apology, Julian turned his head back to the front. The mask was back in place. The pause was over. He resumed walking, his pace undiminished, leaving Clara gasping for air as if she had just surfaced from deep water. "Did you see that?" a junior associate whispered nearby. "He looked right at you." "Did you screw up the quarterly reports?" Clara couldn't answer. She rushed to the elevators, her legs feeling like jelly. She just needed to get to her desk, bury herself in paperwork, and figure out how to return the package anonymous. However, fate wasn't done with her. An hour later, the internal phone on her desk buzzed. It was the executive line. "Clara Hart?" The voice on the other end was clipped and efficient. "Bring the Anderson files to the top floor immediately. Mr. Vance's assistant is out sick, and he needs them now." Clara's stomach dropped to the floor. The top floor. The Ice King's sanctuary? This was it. This was her chance to speak up about the box, to clear her name. If she handed him the files and then quickly mentioned the delivery error, she could absolve herself. It was the right thing to do. She grabbed the folder, her hands shaking so badly she nearly dropped it, and headed for the executive elevator. The ride up was silent and swift, the numbers on the display climbing higher and higher, taking her further away from the safety of the ground. When the doors opened, the atmosphere was different. The air was still, heavy with the scent of leather and expensive coffee. There were no ringing phones, no chattering interns, just a long, silent corridor leading to double mahogany doors. Clara walked down the hall, clutching the files like a shield. As she approached the office, she heard a voice. It wasn't the smooth, professional baritone she expected. It was a low, dangerous growl. "I don't pay you for excuses, Marcus. I pay you for results. And more importantly, I pay you for the truth." Clara froze just outside the open door. Through the crack, she saw Julian standing behind his massive ebony desk. A man in a gray suit, a senior manager, was standing in front of him, looking pale and sweaty. "It was a projection error, Mr. Vance," the manager stammered. "I didn't want to worry about the board until I fixed it. I was trying to protect the company." "You were trying to protect yourself," Julian said. He didn't shout. He didn't have to. His voice was soft, laced with a cruelty that was far more terrifying than any scream. "You hid the numbers. You lied by omission. Do you know what I do with liars, Marcus?" The silence that followed was suffocating. Clara pressed herself against the wall, her eyes wide. "I destroy them," Julian whispered. "Pack your things. If you are still in this building in 10 minutes, security will remove you. And don't bother asking for a reference." The manager turned and fled, nearly knocking Clara over as he sprinted for the elevators. Clara stood there, paralyzed. The file folder felt heavy in her arms. She had come here to return a gift she hadn't asked for, but in doing so, she would have to admit she had kept it overnight. She would have to explain, and listening to the ruthless way he had just decimated a man for a lie of omission, Clara's courage shattered. She couldn't go in there. She couldn't draw his attention. He was a monster in a suit, a king who ruled with ice and fear. If she told him about the box now, he might think she had stolen it, and was only returning it because she got caught. She would be fired. She would lose the only income keeping Leo fed. Quietly, terrified of making a sound, Clara placed the Anderson files on the empty secretary's desk outside the door. She didn't knock. She didn't wait. She turned and walked back to the elevator, her heart breaking with the weight of a secret she was now too afraid to tell. Clara returned to her cubicle, her hands still trembling as she sank into her ergonomic chair. The hum of the office, the clacking of keyboards, and the low drone of the printer usually helped her focus. But today, the noise felt distant, like static on a radio. She stared at her computer screen, but the spreadsheet of quarterly expenses blurred into a haze of colors. Her mind was adrift, pulled back by the sheer terror of Julian Vance's voice into a memory she kept locked in the deepest, most protected vault of her heart. It wasn't often she let herself remember. The memory was dangerous. It was a beautiful, painful thing that didn't fit with her life of coupons, thrift stores, and lonely nights. But the fear she had felt upstairs, the raw intensity of Julian's presence, had dislodged the lock. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights of the office faded. The smell of toner was replaced by the scent of night-blooming jasmine and rain. 5 years ago, she hadn't been Clara, the struggling single mom, back then. She was just Clara, the catering temp, wearing a black uniform that was slightly too big, balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes. It was the St. Jude's Masquerade Charity Gala, the most opulent event of the season. The mansion was a blur of silk, diamonds, and laughter that sounded like breaking glass. Everyone wore masks, elaborate, feathered, gilded things that turned the wealthy elite into birds of paradise and Venetian ghosts. Clara was invisible then, too. She wove through the crowd, offering drinks to people who didn't look at her face, only at the crystal in her hand. By midnight, her feet were bleeding in her cheap shoes. Desperate for a moment of silence, she had slipped out through the French doors into the garden. The garden was a labyrinth of shadows and moonlight. She found a stone bench near a fountain and sat down, kicking off her shoes with a sigh that seemed too loud in the stillness. Heavy is the head that wears the crown, or in your case, the feet that walk the floor. The voice came from the shadows, deep, resonant, and laced with a weariness that matched her own. Clara jumped, clutching her apron. A man stepped out from behind a hedge. He was tall, dressed in a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He wore a mask, a simple, stark black domino mask that covered his eyes but left his jaw and mouth exposed. His mouth was unsmiling, yet not unkind. I'm sorry, sir. I'll go back inside," Clara stammered, reaching for her shoes. "Don't," he said, moving closer. He sat on the edge of the fountain, a respectful distance away. "Please, stay. If I have to listen to one more conversation about tax havens or yacht maintenance, I think I might throw myself into the koi pond." Clara laughed. It was a genuine, startled sound. "Yacht maintenance sounds tragic." "You have no idea," he replied, a hint of a smile touching his lips. "It's a hard life, pretending to care about things that don't matter." They talked. At first it was hesitant, but then, like a dam breaking, the words flowed. They didn't exchange names. He was the mask, and she was the caterer. But they spoke about things that mattered. She told him about her dreams of studying art, dreams that had been shelved to pay for her sick mother's medical bills. He told her about the pressure of a legacy he didn't want, a kingdom of cold stone he was expected to rule alone. He spoke of a loneliness so profound it made her heart ache. "I feel like I'm screaming in a soundproof room," he had whispered, looking up at the moon. "And everyone is just applauding the silence." Clara had reached out then, an impulse she couldn't control, and touched his hand. "I hear you," she said softly. The connection was electric. It wasn't just physical. It was a recognition of two souls who were tired of wearing masks, even though they were literally wearing them. He turned to her, and the intensity of his gaze through the eye holes of the mask seared her. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice rough. "No one," she answered. "You are everyone," he corrected. The kiss that followed wasn't planned. It was a collision. It was desperate and hungry, a reclaiming of life in the midst of emptiness. One thing led to another, a blur of passion and need hidden away in the sanctuary of the garden pavilion. For one night, Clara wasn't the poor girl from the wrong side of the tracks, and he wasn't the burdened prince. They were just a man and a woman, finding solace in each other's warmth. But when dawn broke, painting the sky in bruises of purple and gold, reality crashed back in. Clara woke up first. She saw the expensive watch on his wrist, and the cufflinks on the floor. Panic set in. She was a caterer. He was someone important. If she stayed, it would become sordid. It would be a mistake. She didn't want to see the regret in his eyes when he woke up and saw her in the harsh light of day. So she fled. She left him sleeping, taking nothing but her shoes and a memory. She never saw his face. 9 months later, Leo was born with those same intense eyes. Back in the present, Clara blinked, the spreadsheet coming back into focus. She touched her chest, her heart aching with a phantom pain. She looked toward the glass elevator that led to the top floor. It was impossible. Julian Vance was a god of industry, a man made of ice and numbers. The man in the garden had been warm, vulnerable, and human. They couldn't be the same person, and even if, by some cosmic joke they were, Julian would never remember a catering girl from 5 years ago. To him, she was likely just a blur, a momentary lapse in judgment. "Stop it, Clara!" she scolded herself, typing furiously. "You are a mouse. He is a lion. Stay in your hole." But the universe, it seemed, was tired of her hiding. The intercom on her desk buzzed again. A red light flashed. It wasn't the general line. It wasn't her direct supervisor. It was the direct line from the CEO's office. Clara stared at the phone as if it were a bomb. No one ever called that line. Instructions were usually filtered down through 3 layers of management. With a trembling hand, she picked up the receiver. "Hart speaking," she squeaked. "Ms. Hart." It was him. His voice was low, intimate, and stripped of the professional veneer she had heard earlier. It traveled down the wire and wrapped around her spine. "Mr. Vance?" she breathed. Is there a problem with the files? I can come back up and the files are fine," he interrupted. There was a pause, a heavy silence that crackled with static. "I require a coffee. My assistant is gone, and the temp doesn't know how to make it." "Oh, of course, sir. How do you take it?" Clara grabbed a notepad, her pen hovering. "Black," Julian said slowly, "with a dash of cinnamon, and 2 drops, exactly 2, of vanilla extract." The pen fell from Clara's hand. It clattered onto the desk, loud in the sudden silence of her world. Her breath hitched. That wasn't a standard coffee order. It wasn't something you found at Starbucks. It was specific. It was weird. It was exactly how the man in the garden had asked for his coffee that night, when they had snuck into the kitchen to raid the pantry before the sun came up. She remembered laughing at him, teasing him for being so particular. She remembered him smiling, saying it was the only thing that tasted like comfort. "Ms. Hart?" Julian's voice came through the receiver, darker now. "Are you still there?" "Yes," Clara whispered, her voice barely audible. "Yes, sir. Black, cinnamon, 2 drops of vanilla. I'll bring it right up." She hung up the phone and stared at her hands. They were shaking uncontrollably. It was a coincidence. It had to be. Lots of people like cinnamon. Lots of people liked vanilla. But as she walked toward the break room to prepare the cup, a terrifying thought took root in her mind. What if the package wasn't a mistake? What if the look in the lobby wasn't random? What if the man in the mask had been looking for her just as hard as she had been hiding from him? Clara brewed the coffee, the scent of cinnamon rising like a ghost from her past, and realized with a jolt of pure adrenaline that she was walking straight back into the lion's den. And this time, she wasn't sure if she wanted to be eaten or if she wanted to be saved. She was about to walk into the lion's den, but what happened next in that office wasn't a firing. It was a conversation so strange, and a question so personal, that it would leave Clara questioning reality itself. The elevator ride to the top floor felt different this time. Before, it had been a journey of professional terror. Now, it felt like an ascent to judgment. Clara held the ceramic cup in both hands, letting the warmth seep into her freezing palms. The scent of cinnamon and vanilla wafted up, a fragrant anchor to a memory she was desperately trying to suppress. "It's just coffee," she told herself. "Just a coincidence." When the doors slid open, the silence of the executive floor greeted her. It was a pressurized silence, like the air inside a submarine. Clara walked down the corridor, her footsteps muffled by the plush carpet. The heavy mahogany doors to Julian's office were ajar. She knocked softly on the wood. "Come in," came the voice from within. Clara pushed the door open and stepped inside. The office was cavernous, a testament to minimalist power. One entire wall was floor-to-ceiling glass, offering a panoramic view of the city drowning in rain. The furniture was sleek, black, and sharp-edged. It was a cold room for a cold man. Julian was standing by the window, his back to her. He had removed his suit jacket, revealing a white dress shirt that strained against the muscles of his back. His hands were clasped behind him. He looked like a king surveying a kingdom he didn't particularly like. Your coffee, Mr. Vance, Clara said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her knees. She moved to place it on the corner of his massive desk, careful not to disturb the perfectly aligned papers. Julian turned slowly. The movement was fluid and predatory. He walked toward the desk, his eyes fixed not on the coffee but on her face. Up close, the intensity of his gaze was overwhelming. His eyes were a storm of gray and blue, intelligent and unyielding. "Thank you," he said. He didn't sit down. He stood on the opposite side of the desk, leaning against it, crossing his arms. He was too close. The desk was a barrier, but it felt flimsy against the sheer force of his presence. He picked up the cup, inhaled the steam, and took a sip. His eyes fluttered shut for a brief second, a crack in the armor, before snapping open again. "Perfect," he murmured. "Just as I remember." Clara's heart skipped a beat. "Remember? From when?" "The last time she made coffee for the office, or—" "Tell me, Ms. Hart," Julian said, setting the cup down. His tone shifted, becoming deceptively casual. "How was your evening yesterday?" The question hung in the air, bizarre and out of place. CEOs didn't ask administrative assistants about their evenings. They asked about reports, schedules, and flight bookings. They didn't care about what happened after 5 p.m. Clara stiffened. Her mind flashed to the reality of her evening: the cold rain, the counting of coins, the $3 cupcake, and the crushing guilt of not being able to give Leo a party. It was a humiliating reality, one she guarded fiercely. She wasn't going to let a billionaire pity her. She wasn't going to let him see the cracks in her life. "It was fine, sir," she lied, lifting her chin slightly. "Quiet. Uneventful." Julian's eyes narrowed. He seemed to be searching for something in her expression, a hint of gratitude, perhaps, or a spark of joy. "Uneventful?" he repeated, his voice dropping an octave. "Nothing unexpected happened?" Clara froze. He knew. He absolutely knew about the package. The robot. The $5,000 toy sitting in her living room. But why was he playing games? Was he waiting for her to confess to receiving stolen property? She decided to take the offensive. It was the only way to maintain her dignity. "Actually, Mr. Vance," she began, her hands clasping together tightly. "Since you asked, there was a delivery. A mistake, really." Julian's brow furrowed. "A mistake?" "Yes," Clara said, rushing her words now. "A package from Vance Enterprises was left at my door. A very expensive prototype robot. I assume it was a logistics error, perhaps a wrong address or a glitch in the shipping department. I brought the box in today. It's at my desk. If you could just tell me which department handles returns, I can take it down there immediately." She expected him to nod. She expected him to thank her for her honesty and direct her to the mailroom. Instead, Julian's jaw tightened. A muscle feathered in his cheek. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. He didn't look relieved. He looked irritated, insulted even. "You want to return it," he stated flatly. It wasn't a question. "Well, of course," Clara said, confused by his reaction. "It's not mine. It's worth thousands of dollars. I can't accept something like that. It would be improper. It's clearly an error." Julian pushed himself off the desk and took a step toward her. Clara instinctively took a step back, her back hitting the arm of a leather chair. "And if it wasn't an error?" Julian asked softly. "If someone intended for you to have it, why would anyone do that?" Clara asked, her voice rising in defensive panic. "I'm just an assistant. I can't be bought, Mr. Vance. If this is some kind of a test or a bribe." "A bribe?" Julian let out a short, harsh laugh. It was a bitter sound. He ran a hand through his hair, messing up the perfect style. He looked frustrated, like a man trying to explain color to someone who only saw in black and white. He looked at her, really looked at her, with a mixture of anger and something that looked painfully like disappointment. He had given her a miracle, and she was trying to hand it back like it was a curse. He saw her pride, her fears, blinding independence, and he realized he had miscalculated. She didn't want charity, she wanted respect. But he couldn't tell her the truth yet. He couldn't just say, "I gave it to you because I saw you counting pennies for a cupcake, and it broke me. Ms. Hart, Julian said, his voice regaining its icy composure. He walked back around his desk, putting the physical barrier between them again. He picked up a pen, signaling the conversation was over. Leave the box where it is. Do not take it to the mailroom. Do not speak of it to anyone. But sir, Clara started. That is an order, he snapped, not looking up. Clara felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She felt small, scolded, and confused. She had tried to do the right thing, and he was treating her like she had failed. She turned to the door, her hand on the brass handle. Clara, he said. She stopped. He rarely used her first name. She looked back. Julian wasn't looking at his papers. He was looking at her, his eyes burning with a cryptic intensity. Sometimes gifts aren't mistakes, he said, his voice low and raspy. Sometimes they are debts being paid. Consider it. Back pay for a job well done. I don't have any debts owed to me, Mr. Vance, Clara whispered, her pride flaring one last time. You'd be surprised, he murmured, more to himself than to her. Now go. Clara fled the office, her heart pounding. She didn't understand. Debts? Back pay? It made no sense. But as the heavy door clicked shut behind her, cutting off the sight of the lonely king in his glass tower, she knew one thing for certain. The box under her desk wasn't just a toy. It was a message, and she was terrified to read it. The descent from the executive floor felt like falling from a cliff. Clara stepped out of the elevator back onto the main administrative level, her legs still shaky from the encounter with Julian. The office was bustling now, a hive of ringing phones and hurried conversations. Clara kept her head down, making a beeline for her cubicle, where the black box sat hidden beneath her desk. She just wanted to grab her purse, bury her face in her work, and pretend the world above the 40th floor didn't exist. But in a corporate shark tank like Vance Enterprises, blood in the water never goes unnoticed. And Clara, with her flushed face and trembling hands, looked like wounded prey. Well, look who's back from the summit. The voice was sickly sweet, dripping with venom. Clara froze. Leaning against the wall of her cubicle, arms crossed over a designer silk blouse, was Veronica. Veronica was the head executive assistant, a woman who wielded her proximity to power like a bludgeon. She was beautiful in a sharp, manufactured way, with hair that never moved and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. For years she had viewed Julian Vance as her personal territory, guarding the gate to his office with the ferocity of a dragon. She had noticed the way Julian had paused in the lobby. She had noticed the private phone call, and she was not happy. "Hello, Veronica," Clara said quietly, trying to maneuver around her to get to her chair. "I have a lot of work to do." "I bet you do," Veronica sneered, not moving an inch. Her eyes flicked down to the space under Clara's desk. She nudged the black box with the toe of her red stiletto. "That's a very interesting item to have in a cubicle, Clara. Isn't that a Series X prototype? The ones that aren't even on the market yet?" Clara's heart slammed into her throat. It's a mistake. I was just a mistake." Veronica laughed, loud enough for the surrounding desks to go quiet. Heads began to turn. "You know, Clara, I've been wondering, how does a single mom who wears shoes from the bargain bin suddenly end up with a $5,000 piece of company tech? And how does she get summoned for private coffee meetings with the CEO? The break room was suddenly very quiet. The hum of the refrigerator seemed deafening. Clara felt the eyes of her coworkers boring into her back, some curious, some pitying, but most just glad it wasn't them. "Mr. Vance asked for a file," Clara said, her voice shaking but her chin held high. "And the box was sent to my house in error. I brought it in to return it. That's all." "To return it?" Veronica stepped closer, invading Clara's personal space. She smelled of overpowering perfume and malice. "Or were you hoping to sell it? Or maybe—" She leaned in, her voice dropping to a theatrical whisper that carried across the room. "Maybe you didn't steal it. Maybe you earned it. Is that it, Clara? Are you trading favors for toys? Is that how you pay for that kid of yours?" The insult landed like a slap. Clara gasped, her face draining of color. The accusation was vile, disgusting, and so far from the truth it made her dizzy. to bring Leo into this, to suggest she would debase herself. "Take that back," Clara whispered, her hands clenching into fists at her sides. "Or what?" Veronica smirked, enjoying the show. "You'll cry? Please. We all know what you are. You're nobody who thinks she can climb the ladder on her back. But let me tell you something, honey. Julian Vance plays with toys. He doesn't keep them. And he certainly doesn't keep damaged goods." Tears stung Clara's eyes, hot and humiliating. She wanted to scream. She wanted to run. But she thought of Leo. She thought of the dignity she tried to teach him every day, that being poor didn't mean being weak, that integrity was worth more than gold. She took a deep breath, forcing the tears back. She looked Veronica dead in the eye. "I am returning the box," Clara said, her voice gaining a steely edge. "Because unlike you, Veronica, I don't need to steal or lie to feel valuable. And I don't need to tear other women down to feel powerful." A ripple of shock went through the onlookers. Veronica's smile faltered, replaced by a flash of pure, ugly rage. "You think you're smart?" Veronica hissed. "I'm going to HR. Possession of stolen prototype technology is grounds for immediate termination. And given my position, I think they'll believe me over you. You'll be escorted out by security before lunch." Veronica spun on her heel and marched toward the elevators, her heels clicking a rhythm of impending doom. Clara stood there, shaking. The adrenaline crashed, leaving her feeling hollow. She looked around. Her coworkers quickly looked away, typing furiously, pretending they hadn't seen anything. No one was going to help her. She was alone. Panic set in. If Veronica went to HR, Clara would be fired. She would lose her insurance. She would lose the ability to feed Leo. The label of thief would follow her, making it impossible to get another job. She looked at the black box. It wasn't a gift. It was a curse. It was a bomb that was about to destroy her life. "I have to return it to him directly," she thought. "I have to make him take it back before HR gets involved." It was a desperate plan. It was professional suicide to barge into the CEO's office unannounced. But she had no choice. She was cornered. Clara bent down and hefted the heavy box into her arms. It strained her muscles, a physical manifestation of the burden she carried. She ignored the whispers as she walked toward the elevators. She ignored the fear screaming in her gut. She was going back to the top floor. She was going to confront the Ice King. And she wasn't leaving until he took his debt back. Because she wasn't a thief. She wasn't a mistress. She was a mother. And for her son, she would walk into the fire. But as she stepped into that elevator, Clara didn't know she was holding the key to a billion-dollar secret. In less than 5 minutes, the Ice King wouldn't just break his silence, he would break his own heart to keep her. The box was heavier than she remembered. Or maybe it was just the weight of her entire life pressing down on her shoulders. Clara stood in the elevator, watching the floor numbers tick upward, 38, 39, 40, each ding sounding like a tolling bell. Her arms ached, the sharp corners of the black packaging digging into her forearms, but she refused to set it down. To set it down was to admit defeat. To set it down was to let Veronica win. Inside the mirrored walls of the elevator, Clara caught her reflection. She looked frayed. Her blouse was wrinkled from the morning's commute. Her hair was escaping its sensible bun, and her eyes were wide with a mixture of terror and determination. She didn't look like someone who belonged on the executive floor. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman holding on to the edge of survival by her fingernails. "Focus, Clara," she told herself. "You are not a victim. You are Leo's mother." She closed her eyes and let the anger fuel her. She thought about the nights she had skipped dinner so Leo could have new shoes. She thought about the second job she had worked cleaning offices just like this one, until her hands were raw, just to pay for his asthma medication. She had never asked for help. She had never taken a handout. When the man from the gala had vanished, leaving her pregnant and alone, she hadn't chased him. She hadn't begged. She had built a life out of nothing but grit and love. She wasn't going to let a misunderstood gift and a vindictive secretary tear that down. "Mr. Vance," she rehearsed in her head, the words sharp and clear. "I appreciate the gesture, whatever it was meant to be, but I cannot keep this up. My integrity is not for sale. My reputation is all I have, and I will not lose it for a toy. It was a good speech. It was strong. It was dignified. The elevator doors slid open. The silence of the top floor hit her again, but this time, it felt less like a sanctuary and more like an arena. The receptionist's desk was empty. The temp must have gone to lunch. The hallway stretched out before her, long and imposing, leading to the double mahogany doors at the end. Clara began the walk. Her heels sank into the plush carpet, making her feel sluggish, like she was walking through quicksand. With every step, the box seemed to grow heavier. Her muscles burned. Sweat prickled at her hairline. Left foot, right foot. Don't stop. She passed the rows of abstract art on the walls, cold splashes of gray and black that probably cost more than her entire apartment building. Everything here was designed to intimidate. Everything shouted power. But Clara held on to the image of Leo's face when he smiled, that gummy, gap-toothed smile that lit up the universe. That was her power. That was real. This was just money. And money couldn't buy what she had. She reached the double doors. They loomed over her, dark and silent. There was no one to stop her. No gatekeepers. Just the handle. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was insanity. You didn't just walk into the CEO's office. You made an appointment. You went through channels. Doing this could get her fired faster than Veronica ever could. But I'm already fired if I don't, she realized. If I don't clear this up now, I'm done. She shifted the box to one hip, balancing it precariously, and reached out. Her hand trembled as it touched the cold brass. She took a breath that shuddered in her lungs, turned the handle, and pushed. The door swung open noiselessly. The office was dim. The storm outside had darkened the sky to a bruised purple, and the only light came from a sleek desk lamp casting a pool of gold on the ebony surface. Julian was there. He wasn't working. He wasn't on the phone. He was sitting in his high-backed leather chair, slumped forward, his elbows on the desk, his face buried in his hands. He looked exhausted. Not the "I worked late" kind of exhausted, but a bone-deep, soul-weary fatigue that no amount of sleep could fix. In his hands he held a small, rectangular object. A photograph. He was staring at it with an intensity that was almost painful to watch. Clara stood in the doorway, the heavy box in her arms, suddenly feeling like an intruder on a private grief. She cleared her throat, the sound small in the vast room. "Mr. Vance?" Julian's head snapped up. The vulnerability vanished instantly, replaced by a mask of stone. He placed the photo face down on the desk, his hand covering it protectively. He stood up slowly. As he rose, he seemed to expand, filling the room with his presence. The tiredness was gone, replaced by a towering, dangerous energy. He was the Ice King again. He looked at the box in her arms, then at her face. His eyes were dark, unreadable pools. "Clara," he said. His voice was low, vibrating through the floorboards. "I thought I gave you an order." The air in the room changed. It shifted from professional to something else, something charged, volatile, and intensely personal. He wasn't looking at an employee who disobeyed a rule. He was looking at a woman who was challenging him. Clara took a step forward, the door clicking shut behind her. She was trapped in the lion's den now. There was no going back. "I can't follow that order," she said, her voice shaking but her gaze steady. "I can't keep it." Julian moved around the desk. He didn't stop until he was standing right in front of her, so close she could smell the rain and cedarwood on his skin. He loomed over her, a silhouette of power against the stormy window. "Why?" he asked. Just one word, but it carried the weight of 1,000 questions. Clara gripped the box tighter, her knuckles white. The tension in the room was a physical thing, a tightrope stretched to the breaking point. She looked up at him, ready to fight, ready to defend her life. But when she met his eyes, she saw something that stopped the breath in her throat. He wasn't angry, he was desperate. The silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone that seemed to vibrate against Clara's skin. She was standing inches from the most powerful man in the city, holding a box that represented everything she was afraid of: debt, pity, and the loss of her hard-won independence. Julian's question hung in the air. Why? It was the catalyst she needed. The fear that had been paralyzing her suddenly ignited into anger. Pure, hot, righteous anger. How dare he ask her why? How dare he sit in his ivory tower and play games with her life? Clara marched past him. She didn't walk, she stomped. She reached the massive ebony desk and slammed the heavy black box down onto the surface. The sound was like a gunshot. A crystal paperweight rattled. The photo he had been hiding slid slightly but remained face down. Why? Clara's voice trembled, but this time not from fear. Because I am not a charity case, Mr. Vance. That is why. She turned to face him, her chest heaving. The adrenaline was coursing through her veins, making her feel 10 feet tall. I know what people like you think, she continued, the words pouring out like a broken dam. You think you can just throw money at problems. You think because I'm a single mother, because I count coupons and wear last season's clothes, that I'm desperate. You think you can buy my silence, or my loyalty, or whatever game it is you're playing with this thing. She gestured wildly at the robot. Julian didn't move. He stood perfectly still, watching her. His face was unreadable, but his eyes were burning. My son, Clara said, her voice cracking on the word. Leo, he doesn't need a $5,000 robot. He doesn't need handouts from a man who doesn't even know his name. He needs a mother who can look at herself in the mirror. He needs to know that we earn what we have. I have raised him for 5 years on my own. I have scraped and saved and cried myself to sleep so he wouldn't have to feel the cold. And we are fine. We are happy. Tears were streaming down her face now, but she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall, a testament to her fury. I don't know why you sent this. Maybe you felt pity. Maybe it's a tax write-off. Or maybe Veronica is right and this is some cruel joke. But I won't take it. I won't let you make me feel small in my own home. Take it back. She finished her speech, breathless. The room was silent again. Julian hadn't said a word. He hadn't defended himself. He hadn't called security. He just looked at her with an expression that shattered her heart. It was a look of profound, devastating sorrow. Are you done? He asked quietly. Yes, Clara snapped. I quit. I'll send my resignation in the morning. She spun on her heel and marched toward the door. She needed to get out. She needed air. She felt like she was going to collapse. She reached for the handle. Slam. A hand, large and warm, hit the door frame above her head, shutting it firmly. Clara gasped and spun around. Julian was there. He had moved with a speed that defied logic, crossing the room in a blur of motion. He was pressed against her, trapping her between his body and the wood of the door. But he wasn't attacking her. He wasn't looming over her in anger. His body was a shield, a wall of heat and presence. His breathing was ragged, matching hers. Let me go, Clara whispered, panic flaring again. No, Julian said. His voice was no longer the smooth baritone of the CEO. It was rough, broken, and human. I can't let you go. Not again. He raised his other hand. Clara flinched, expecting a blow or a grab. But his touch was a feather-light caress. His fingers grazed her cheek, wiping away a tear. The contact sent a shockwave through her body that made her knees buckle. It was electric. It was familiar. He leaned down, his forehead resting against hers. He closed his eyes as if he was in pain, as if simply being near her was an agony he had endured for too long. You don't understand, he murmured against her skin. It's not charity, Clara. It's not a write-off. I didn't send it because you're poor. I sent it because, God, I missed his birthday. Clara froze. What? Julian pulled back slightly, just enough to look into her eyes. The mask was gone. The Ice King had melted, leaving behind a man who looked terrified and hopeful all at once. The robot, he whispered, his voice trembling. Keep it. I'm his father. The world stopped. The rain outside ceased to exist. The office walls fell away. There was only the sound of those 3 words echoing in Clara's skull, bouncing around like trapped shrapnel. I'm his father. No, Clara breathed, shaking her head. That's impossible. You're Julian Vance. I'm the man from the garden, he said softly. He stepped back and raised his hands to his neck. With shaking fingers, he undid his silk tie, pulling it loose. He unbuttoned the top button of his shirt. He wasn't stripping, he was revealing. He pulled the collar aside to reveal a small, jagged scar just below his collarbone. Clara gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. She remembered that scar. 5 years ago, in the dim light of the pavilion, she had traced it with her fingertips. He had told her he got it falling from a tree as a child, the only time he had ever escaped his nannies. It was a secret mark, a map to a memory she had cherished. The coffee, Julian said, his eyes searching hers. Cinnamon. 2 drops of vanilla. You remembered. And the way you looked at the stars that night. You said they looked like spilled sugar. You told me you wanted to name your son Leo, after the constellation, because he would be a lion. Clara staggered back, hitting the door. Her legs gave out, and she slid down to the floor, her hands covering her face. It was true. It was all true. The pull she had felt, the intensity of his gaze, the bizarre kindness of the gift. The man she had fallen in love with for one night, the man she had dreamed about for 5 years, was the cold, ruthless billionaire she worked for. Julian knelt in front of her. He didn't touch her again, respecting her shock. He just knelt there in his expensive suit, on the floor, looking at her as if she were the only thing in the world that mattered. I didn't know, he said, his voice thick with emotion. I swear to you, Clara, I didn't know. Clara lowered her hands. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with shock and betrayal. You're him, she whispered. You're actually him. I am, he confirmed. But, a wave of confusion washed over her. If you're him, if you remember the coffee, if you remember the stars, her voice rose, sharp with the pain of 5 years of loneliness, 5 years of fevers and night terrors and empty bank accounts. If you knew who I was, she demanded, staring at him. Why did you wait 5 years? Why did you let me struggle? Why did you let me believe I was alone? The question hung in the air, heavy and accusatory. It was the question that would determine everything. It was the barrier between forgiveness and hatred. Julian looked down, shame coloring his features. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the photo he had been hiding on his desk. He turned it over and held it out to her. It wasn't a photo of her. It was a photo of Leo. A grainy, zoomed-in picture taken from a distance of a little boy with wild hair and Julian's eyes walking into a bakery. I didn't wait 5 years to find you, Julian whispered. I waited 5 years because I couldn't find you. Until last week. Clara stared at the photograph in her shaking hands. It was Leo, her Leo. He was wearing his favorite dinosaur raincoat, jumping in a puddle outside the bakery. It must have been taken only a few days ago. The realization that Julian, this powerful, terrifying man, had been watching her son from the shadows sent a chill down her spine, but also a strange, confusing warmth. You were spying on us? She whispered, looking up at him. Julian flinched as if she had slapped him. He was still kneeling on the floor, disregarding the immaculate crease of his trousers. No, not spying, searching. God, Clara, I have been searching for you since the moment I woke up and found you gone. He took a deep breath, running a hand through his hair. He looked less like a CEO now and more like a man confessing his sins. That morning, he began, his voice raspy. When I woke up in the pavilion and saw the empty space beside me, I felt a panic I have never known. I didn't even know your real name. You told me you were Elena. I turned the gala upside down. I interrogated the staffing agency, but there was no Elena. You had vanished like a ghost. Clara lowered her eyes. I was scared, she admitted softly. I used a fake name because I didn't want to get in trouble. I was just a temp. You were you. I didn't care about that, Julian said fiercely. I didn't care about the status or the money. That night, it was the first time in my life I felt seen, truly seen. I spent a year looking for you. I hired private investigators. I checked every catering company in the city. But without a name or a face, since you wore that mask the entire time, it was impossible. Eventually, I had to stop. I had to run the company. I had to become the man everyone expected me to be. The cold, heartless Julian Vance. He let out a bitter laugh. It was easy to be cold when the only warmth I had ever known had walked away. Clara felt a lump form in her throat. She had spent 5 years thinking she was a meaningless fling to him, a one-night stand he had forgotten by breakfast. To hear that he had been hunting for her, grieving her, it shifted the ground beneath her feet. "So how?" she asked. "How did you find us?" "Last week," Julian said, his eyes softening. "I was doing a walk-through of the administrative floor. I never usually look at the desks. I keep my eyes forward. But something caught my eye. A photo frame on a cubicle wall. It was a picture of a little boy." He reached out slowly, tentatively, and touched Clara's hand that was still holding the photo. I stopped. I couldn't breathe. I looked at that boy and I saw me. Not just the eyes, Clara. It was the chin. The way he held his head. And then I saw his ear. Clara frowned. "His ear? He has a small fold on the top of his left ear," Julian said, a sad smile touching his lips. "It's a genetic trait. A Vance family trait. My father had it. I have it. And that little boy in the picture, he had it." He looked at her with an intensity that burned. I looked at the nameplate on the desk, Clara Hart, and suddenly the pieces fit. The voice, the laugh, the way you walk. I had been walking past you for months, Clara, and I never saw you because I was looking for Elena. I was looking for a ghost, and you were right there, filing my reports. Clara's heart hammered. "So you knew? Since last week?" "I knew," he nodded. "I did a background check. Not to invade your privacy, but to confirm. When I saw his birth certificate, when I saw the date," he choked up, unable to finish the sentence. "I have a son. A 5-year-old son I never met." "Why didn't you say something?" Clara cried, the tears spilling over again. "Why the games? Why the robot? Why didn't you just come to me?" "Because I was terrified," Julian confessed. The vulnerability in his voice was stark. "Look at me, Clara. Look at my life. I have enemies. I have corporate rivals who would use a secret child as leverage. I have paparazzi who would camp out on your lawn. I was afraid that if I just barged into your life, I would destroy the safe little world you built for him. I was afraid you would hate me. I was afraid you would think I was a monster coming to take him away." He gripped her hand tighter. "So I wanted to help first. I wanted to give him something. I saw your financial records. I saw how hard you've been working. It killed me, Clara. It killed me to know that while I was sitting in this tower, my son was sleeping in a drafty apartment. The robot. It was a stupid, clumsy attempt to be a father from a distance, to give him something magical because I couldn't give him myself." Clara looked at him, really seeing him now. She saw the fear behind the power. She saw the father who wanted to protect his child so badly that he was willing to stay in the shadows. It wasn't manipulation. It was love, clumsy and terrified, but real. "I don't hate you," Clara whispered. "I could never hate you. But you can't buy him, Julian. You can't buy us." "I know," he said. "I know that now." He stood up, pulling her gently to her feet. "Come here. I want to show you something." He led her across the office to a wall of built-in bookshelves. He pressed a hidden panel, and a section of the shelves clicked open, revealing a secure, hidden closet. Clara gasped. It wasn't filled with cash or gold. It was filled with things. There were toy cars, dozens of them. There were children's books, stacks of them, from Goodnight Moon to encyclopedias about space. There was a small baseball glove. There was a college savings fund portfolio with Leo's name on it, established 3 days ago. There were sketches, bad, hand-drawn sketches, of a playground Julian had seemingly designed himself. "I went a little crazy," Julian admitted, rubbing the back of his neck, looking embarrassed. "Once I knew, I couldn't stop thinking about him. I wanted to buy him the world. I wanted to make up for 5 years of missed birthdays in 1 week." He picked up a small, stuffed lion from the shelf. It looked soft and expensive. "I bought this the day I found out," he said softly, stroking the lion's mane. "I've been keeping it in here, talking to it, like a crazy person, hoping one day I'd get to give it to him. He turned to Clara, his eyes wet. The Ice King was gone. In his place was a man desperate for a chance. "Clara," he said, his voice pleading, "I don't want to take him from you. You are his mother. You are the one who raised him. You are the hero of this story, not me. But please, don't make me miss another day. I don't want to be a secret benefactor. I don't want to be the boss. I just want to know him." He took a step closer, the stuffed lion dangling from his hand. "Let me be his father," he whispered. "Let me protect you both. Let me take care of the bills, the bullies, the cold. Let me do that for you. Not because I'm buying you, but because I think I've loved you since the moment you sat on that bench and told me about your dreams." Clara looked at the wall of toys, then at the man holding the lion. The anger had drained away, leaving only a profound sense of relief. The struggle was over. She didn't have to carry the world alone anymore. She wasn't invisible. She was found. She reached out and took the lion from his hand. It was soft. "He likes blue," she whispered, a tear sliding down her cheek. "But he'll love the lion." Julian let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. A genuine, radiant smile broke across his face, the first real smile she had seen on him since that night in the garden. "Can I meet him?" he asked, his voice cracking with hope. Clara nodded. "He's at home with the babysitter. But his birthday party is tonight. Just us. And a cupcake." "A cupcake sounds perfect," Julian said. "I'll drive." "No chauffeur?" Clara teased gently, wiping her eyes. "No," Julian said, grabbing his coat. "Just us. A family." The rain had stopped by the time Julian's sleek, black sedan pulled up to the curb of Clara's apartment building. The streetlights flickered against the wet pavement, casting long, dancing shadows. To Clara, the building had always looked tired and gray, a monument to her struggle. But tonight, seeing Julian step out of the car, looking up at the peeling paint with a reverence usually reserved for cathedrals, it looked different. It looked like the starting line of something new. "It's not much," Clara said, feeling a sudden flare of embarrassment as she led him to the stairwell. The hallway smelled of boiled cabbage and damp wool. "It's home," Julian corrected her, his hand resting lightly, protectively, on the small of her back. "It's where you kept him safe." When Clara unlocked the door, the apartment was quiet. The babysitter, Mrs. Gable from down the hall, was dozing in the armchair while Leo played quietly on the rug with a set of plastic blocks. "Mommy!" Leo chirped, scrambling up. He had messy dark hair and eyes that were impossibly wide and blue, Julian's eyes. He stopped in his tracks when he saw the tall stranger standing in the doorway. Julian froze, too. The billionaire CEO, who commanded armies of employees and negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, looked terrified. He stood there in his bespoke Italian suit, clutching the stuffed lion and the heavy black robot box, seemingly unsure if he should breathe. "Leo," Clara said softly, her heart swelling. "This is a friend. This is Julian." Julian dropped to one knee. It was a graceful, humble movement. He was now eye level with the 5-year-old. The contrast was stark, the impeccable luxury of the man against the worn, faded carpet of the apartment. "Hi, Leo," Julian whispered. His voice was thick with emotion. Leo didn't hide behind Clara's legs. He didn't cry. He tilted his head, studying Julian with a curious intensity. There was an instinctive recognition there, a blood bond that transcended logic. Leo took a step forward, then another. He reached out a small, sticky hand and touched Julian's lapel. "You look like the man in my book," Leo said solemnly. "The king." Julian let out a choked laugh, tears glistening in his eyes. "No, Leo. I'm just a guy who brought you a present." He held out the stuffed lion. Leo grabbed it, hugging it tight. Then, Julian pushed the black box forward. "And this? Your mom said it was okay." The next hour was a blur of pure, unadulterated magic. They sat on the floor, Julian Vance, sitting cross-legged on a rug that cost less than his socks, and opened the robot. When the machine whirred to life, chirping and moving its articulated arms, Leo shrieked with joy. He looked from the robot to Julian, his face glowing. "Did you make this?" Leo asked, awestruck. "I helped." Julian smiled, watching his son with a hunger that was heartbreaking. But it needs a pilot. Think you can handle it? Yes, Leo shouted, diving into Julian's lap to look at the controls. Julian stiffened for a second, overwhelmed by the contact, before wrapping his arms around the boy, holding him as if he were made of fragile glass. Clara stood by the kitchenette, watching them, tears streaming silently down her face. The hole in her heart, the one that had been there for 5 years, was finally closing. But the world outside hadn't completely vanished. Clara's phone, sitting on the counter, buzzed aggressively. It vibrated again and again. She glanced at the screen. It was an email notification, then a text, then another email. Urgent, HR complaint, theft of company property. Sender Veronica Miller. Clara's blood ran cold. The bubble burst. Veronica. She had actually done it. She had reported Clara to Human Resources. Clara? Julian's voice broke her trance. He was looking at her from the floor, sensing the shift in her mood. What's wrong? It's nothing, Clara stammered, reaching to turn the phone off. Just work. Julian gently moved Leo off his lap and stood up. He crossed the small room in 2 strides and took the phone from her hand. He looked at the screen. His eyes, so warm a moment ago, turned to absolute ice. She filed a formal complaint, Julian said, his voice terrifyingly calm. And she CC'd the entire executive board. She's trying to humiliate you publicly. I can explain to them, Clara said, panic rising. I'll tell them I returned it. No, Julian said. He pulled his own phone from his pocket. You won't explain anything. You don't answer them. You answer me. He dialed a number. He didn't put it on speaker, but the room was so small Clara could hear the ringtone. This is Vance, Julian said into the phone. I want Veronica Miller's access badges deactivated immediately. Yes, right now. Remotely wipe her company phone and laptop. She is terminated for harassment and filing a false report against a senior partner. Clara's eyes widened. Senior partner? Julian ignored her, continuing his ruthless dismantling of the threat. Draft a memo to the board. Clarify that the prototype was a personal gift from the CEO to his family. Any further questions regarding Ms. Hart can be directed to me personally, and have security escort Ms. Miller out of the building if she is still there. If she says a word, remind her of her NDA. Done. He hung up. The call lasted less than 30 seconds. Veronica, the woman who had terrorized Clara for years, was gone. Erased. Julian looked at Clara. The ruthlessness faded, replaced by that protective intensity. She will never touch you again, he vowed. No one will. You aren't just an employee, Clara. You're the mother of my son. And anyone who disrespects you disrespects me. He tossed the phone onto the counter and turned back to Leo, who was happily doing the robot dance. Leo, Julian called out softly. Buddy, can I talk to your mom for a second? Okay, Leo yelled, not looking up. Julian took Clara's hands. His grip was firm and grounding. He looked around the tiny apartment, then back at her. I handled Veronica, he said. But that's the easy part. The hard part is this. He took a deep breath. I don't want to be a visitor, Clara. I don't want to be the weekend dad who drops by with expensive toys and then goes back to his penthouse. I missed 5 years. I missed his first steps. I missed his first word. I miss you. He stepped closer, invading her space in the best way possible. I want to wake up and make him pancakes, even though I have no idea how to cook. I want to drive him to school. I want to be here when he has a nightmare. And, he paused, his gaze dropping to her lips, then back to her eyes. I want to take you out on a real date. No masks, no secrets. Just us. Julian, Clara breathed, her heart racing. Don't just accept the robot, he whispered, leaning his forehead against hers. Accept me. Let me be his dad. Let me be yours. Move in with me. Or I'll move in here. I don't care. I'll sleep in the bathtub if I have to. Just don't make me leave tonight. Clara looked at him. She saw the billionaire who could buy countries pleading to sleep on a floor just to be near them. She saw the love that had survived 5 years of silence. You won't fit in the bathtub. She laughed through her tears. I'll make it work, he promised. Clara smiled, a true, radiant smile that lit up the gloomy room. You don't have to leave, Julian. You're already home. 1 month later. The city skyline hadn't changed. The rain still fell in gray sheets against the glass, turning the world outside into a watercolor painting of neon and shadow. But for Clara, everything was different. She stood by the floor-to-ceiling window of the penthouse, looking down at the streets she used to trudge through. She wasn't wearing the worn-out trench coat anymore. She was wrapped in a cashmere cardigan that felt like a cloud against her skin, holding a mug of tea that didn't taste like budget bags and tap water. It tasted like bergamot and peach. It had been 30 days since the storm broke, since the box appeared, since the revelation, since Julian had knelt on her carpet and asked to be a father. Life at Vance Enterprises had shifted. Clara wasn't the invisible assistant anymore. She had walked on the Monday after the night, holding Julian's hand. The whispers had been rampant, of course. The shock on the faces of the board members when Julian introduced her not as his secretary, but as his partner was a memory she would cherish forever. Veronica's desk was empty, cleared out the same night. The toxicity that had choked the office air was gone, replaced by a respectful, if slightly terrified, deference. But Clara didn't let the luxury change her. She still worked. She still insisted on earning her keep, managing the company's charity foundation, a role Julian had created specifically for her, knowing her heart for the invisible people of the city. He loved her for that. He told her every night, tracing the worry lines that were slowly fading from her face, that he didn't love her because she gave him a son. He loved her because she was the strongest person he had ever met. He loved her because she had built a castle out of crumbs. Stop thinking so loud, a voice murmured, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. Julian's arms circled her waist from behind. He rested his chin on her shoulder, pulling her back against his chest. He smelled of cedarwood and that expensive, comforting cologne that was now the scent of her safety. I was just looking at the rain, Clara whispered, leaning into him. I used to hate it. I used to worry about Leo's shoes getting wet, about the leak in the bedroom ceiling, about everything. And now? Julian asked, kissing the side of her neck. No. She turned in his arms, looking up into those stormy blue eyes that were finally at rest. Now I just see rain. The knot of anxiety that had lived in her chest for 5 years, the constant, grinding fear of not enough, was gone. It wasn't just the money. It was a partnership. It was knowing that if she stumbled, someone was there to catch her. Come on, Julian said, taking her hand. He's waiting for the next chapter. They walked into the living room. It was vast and elegant, but it wasn't cold. It was littered with the chaotic, beautiful debris of a family. There were toy cars parked on the Italian leather sofa. There were drawings taped to the marble fireplace. Leo was sitting on the plush rug, wearing dinosaur pajamas, waiting expectantly with a book in his lap. The $5,000 robot, the catalyst for it all, sat in the corner, powered down and forgotten. It was a cool toy, sure, but it couldn't compare to the real thing. Daddy! Leo cheered as they entered. You promised! Chapter 4! The one where the knight fights the dragon! I remember. Julian grinned, sitting down on the floor. He didn't sit on the couch. He sat right there on the rug, cross-legged, pulling Leo into his lap. But you have to do the dragon voices. Okay, Leo giggled. Clara sat beside them, tucking her legs under her. She watched them. She watched the way Julian's large hand held the small book and the way Leo leaned back against his father's chest with total, absolute trust. She watched the way the firelight danced in their matching eyes. It was a quiet scene. No fireworks, no dramatic speeches. Just the soft murmur of Julian's voice reading about brave knights and the crackle of the fireplace. But to Clara, it was the loudest victory of her life. She thought about the woman standing in the bakery, counting pennies for a single cupcake. She wanted to reach back through time and hug her. She wanted to tell her, hold on, the rain doesn't last forever. You are invisible now, but one day, you will be the center of someone's universe. Julian paused reading and looked over at her. He didn't say anything. He just reached out his hand, palm open. Clara placed her hand in his. He squeezed it tight, an anchor in the storm. And they lived. Julian read the final line of the chapter, looking straight at Clara. Happily ever after. The end, Leo shouted. No, Clara whispered, resting her head on Julian's shoulder as the firelight glowed warm and gold around them. Not the end. It's just the beginning. And as the city slept outside, cold and indifferent, the three of them sat together in the warmth, a family forged in shadows and found in the light, finally, perfectly home.